Hey everyone, today we're talking about conversion. Conversion is probably one of the most confusing stats in Grim Dawn, if not the most confusing stat in Grim Dawn. Especially if you're new to the game and you see, 10% physical damage converted to gold damage on an item, and you're like, what does this mean? And it's one of those things where I think it's going to be a supremely powerful ability going forward, especially if you have attacks and abilities that have physical damage and you're gearing towards elemental damage. It can actually hugely increase the damage of those abilities. So, first things first, the definition of conversion from the game guide. Conversion is a special stat found on equipment and skills that changes one damage type to another. The way it behaves is different depending on whether it modifies a skill or is found on a piece of equipment. And here's the important part. The order of events for conversion is as follows. The base skill, then you add on skill modifiers, then you'd use conversion from a skill or transmuter, then conversion on equipment, and then you take the equipment auras and passives that you convert with, and that's the final thing that adds to the conversion of an ability. So by example, Albrecht's Aether Ray with Tainted Power converts all of the Aether damage to chaos damage on the beam. So what happens is, the way this is stacked up is you have your flat Aether damage on the actual Aether Ray, then you take the Disintegration Transmuter percent Aether damage and add that on, then the Transmuter for that skill gets clicked on in the third position and converts it all to chaos damage. And then you would take, say, all of your percent chaos damage and add on to that, and that's how that ability works. In the case of, say, this character I have open right now, he actually doesn't have conversion on his gear. He gets conversion from Iskander's Elemental Exchange. So if he had conversion, say, on a not a cold stone, on Chill Blaze, that cold sword, it would convert 15% physical damage to cold before the 25% physical damage to elemental damage from Iskander's Elemental Exchange is taken into account. And the reason I'm saying this is powerful is because any source of that initial damage type, regardless if it's a skill or a weapon, gets converted to that other second damage type. So in this guy's case, Cadence deals physical damage. 625 physical damage when it procs. So for converting that, you would take 25% of 625 and you'd convert it to elemental damage, and because it's flat elemental damage, it's divided between cold, fire, and lightning. So 625 by 2 is 312, and then by 2 again is 1. Oh, it's like 106 damage. So you would take off 106-ish damage from that, and then you would then run that 106 damage through, like, that would be about 34, 32, no 34 34 damage, 34 cold, 34 lightning, 34 fire. And that doesn't actually sound like a lot until you realize that you're running that 30 times about 3, times about 2.5, 2 3/4, and then times it by 2.5 for cold, and then another 100% damage, and it all adds up. That's the thing. This all just adds up because the conversion is taking a small chunk of the physical damage and running it through all your multipliers to get you to your new damage type. And there are certain abilities, and I'm going to go over this later and sort of just reading off numbers from this handy dandy piece of paper I did math on for another ability. But real quick, on Cadence here, the physical damage is 644 to 702 damage by default. His cold damage is 257 to 366. His lightning damage is 264 to 376. So we've got about 250 to 360, 370 for his two main elemental types. And then, Cadence is dealing about, 680 damage. Now, what's going to happen here is you click on Iskander's Elemental Exchange, and you see the damage go way up. That's because for about, 150, is that 150? Yeah. For about 150 physical damage, he gets a huge jump in his cold and lightning damages. That's because, and this is why, this is going to be a note, conversion for me, in terms of numbers, is very hard to test clinically right now. And if anyone knows a way to do it, please let me know, and I'll go through I'll go through and try to do this more clinically. But because conversion, there's a lot that happens with adding on elemental types and changing elemental types, and there aren't really like a non-convert weapon with a convert weapon that you could really compare side by side. It gets a little rough to test, because if you look at Iskander's Elemental Exchange, it converts 25% physical damage to elemental damage, but it also adds on 177 elemental damage, and then that all gets another 22% damage boost. So it's actually kind of hard to just do a very like clinical trial test of this. So yeah, Cadence gets a big boost, so that now he has 2 damages that are up in the 600s instead of just the physical damage and the other 2 are 300s. So if you look, he actually gets a huge damage bonus from that tiny bit of conversion. So I have to switch characters real quick. Okay, so on my Aether Ray guy, Soul Flare converts, in case my Soul Flare, converts 16% physical damage to Aether damage. Aether Steel Bolts does another 10% physical damage to Aether damage. And I have an Enchanted Flint on my offhand, which does 10% physical damage converted to fire damage. So, on this character, he doesn't actually get a lot of benefit out of conversion, except with one key ability, and that is Vindictive Flame. So Vindictive Flame on its own, for him, deals 112 physical damage, 112 physical damage. I have 109 written down for some reason. Okay. I think that might be a point lower, would be 109. Let's pretend he has 109 physical damage off of Vindictive Flame. And if you run it through the totals for converting it, you end up with about 22 of the physical damage being converted to fire, and about 28 of the physical damage converted to Aether. What this means is, the physical damage is only going to be about 68 damage. The fire damage is going to be 71 damage after you run it through all his multipliers, and the Aether damage is going to jump up to 93 damage after you do all the Aether multipliers. So what that means is, this is about 233 damage, up from the 109, effectively doubling the amount of physical damage that this ability kicks out. Not counting the Iskander's Elemental Exchange conversion as well, because that would also convert it to cold and lightning and more fire, and the cold and lightning would get run through any smaller elemental damage bonuses he has, and then would be added back into the damage. And if I'm doing my my math semi-correct, he would also deal with the fire side of this about 2,134 fire damage from the 650 that's listed there. And well, I have 684 written down. I don't know where the randomization of these numbers is coming from, but anyways, let's pretend it's 684 because that's what I've written down. So if you added the 233 and the 2,000 damage together, it's about 2,300 damage a return whenever he's hit. And I also did some speculative stuff, which is really, really speculative, because technically this would not come out as a level 1 ability, it'd be a level 2 ability. But let's pretend he has the big one. Because all your physical damage is affected by all of your conversion, my high-tech piece of paper tells me that the big one would deal about 1,219 damage by default. The physical damage is actually a tiny bit higher. Was there a stealth update? Oh, he might have a different thing equipped and it might be showing me a tooltip change. So it'd be 1,219 is what I wrote down, even though it says 1158. and then it's a 522 to 644. So that 522 to 644, the physical damage would be multiplied in for his conversions, and you end up with about 122 damage changed to fire and 151 damage changed to aether. So you would lose about, the physical damage would drop to about 364-ish. And then after you run the other damages through the multipliers, you end up, this is very exciting and riveting visually, isn't it? But you'd end up with 364 physical, 381 fire, and 501 aether, which all adds up to about 1,248 damage. Significantly higher than the 661 that's listed there. So you can see that, like, just in spitball numbers, you deal a lot more damage with conversion than without if you're gearing an elemental damage type, a non-physical damage type, and you have an attack that's physical damage. And this is true for any physical damage ability. So if I wanted to give him Granado, I could give him Granado. That 351 to 494 physical damage would have about, in this particular setup, about 20% converted to fire, and about 20% converted to fire, and about 26% converted to aether, which would then get multiplied by your multipliers. The physical damage is multiplied by its physical damage multiplier, and then you add it all together, and it makes a Granado. It'd probably be about, like, what, 800, 900 damage instead of the 494 listed there. So, that has been my information dump on conversion. It's actually a pretty simple concept once you get used to it. It just seems very complex on paper. You take an ability, you apply all of its transmuters and all of its modifiers. If the transmuter converts damage, you apply that first. Then you take any conversion on your equipment, apply that. Then you take any conversion on your auras and passives, and then apply that. You then run all of those resulting damages through all of your percent multipliers. The percent multipliers are not done from your gearing, from your equipment and your passives and all that. It's all done after the conversion happens. So you're not double dipping. Like, the physical damage I mentioned before is not going to get the percent physical damage added on first and then converted. It's going to be just that flat physical damage from the ability. Then the resulting physical damage after you subtract all the other physical damage gets the bonus. And the same goes for the damage that happens the damage that results from something being converted. If it gets converted to fire damage, it would come out and then get hit up by your multipliers. So, I hope this all makes sense, and I hope that this wasn't too boring a video because I'm not, like, running in the field to test these things. And I would really actually love to test some numbers popping off enemies. It's just really difficult to. Because all of the conversion I can think of would be like a specific weapon converting to a specific damage type, but the weapon has its own stats, and there's no equivalent. Like, I don't know if there's an equivalent physical pistol to Soulflare, because if there was, I'd probably go and equip that pistol, fire some shots off, then equip Soulflare, fire some shots off, and see what happens. But also, I can't, like, turn on Iskandra's Elemental Exchange for a raw comparison, because there's a whole lot of things Iskandra's brings to the table beyond that simple conversion. So, anyways, thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time.